All right. And once again, this is Proximity Sound, and I'm talking into my microphone over the internet to Lat Mackey himself. And we're about to talk about Game Boy development and GB Studio.
Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, a podcast that features conversations with speedrunners, developers, content creators, and everything in between. This is definitely going to be on the developer side, but I think this is in the in-between as well. I'm super excited. We're going to chat all about Game Boy development, and to do so and to bring this whole conversation to light, I'm excited to welcome in Proximity Sound. Proximity, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, so I want to try to get this right. So, audio engineer by day, Game Boy enthusiast, developer, Game Boy Studio Central, or GB Studio Central by night?
So I actually, the audio gig is also a moonlight thing. I am an audio person first and foremost. That's my main passion, what I love most in life. But in order to, keep a roof over our head and keep the kids fed, I am actually a technologist at a education institution, and I work predominantly with Mac computers, so Mac tech. That's my day job. I do audio engineering for podcasts, digital content creators like Gaming Historian, Darknet Diaries, and then as another side thing, more for fun, is also some game development. More recently, though, managing GB Studio Central, which is a website dedicated to GB Studio, which is a Game Boy development tool. And we'll talk more about that, I guess.
Man, what a list. How awesome is that? And I have to tell you, that's probably where I became familiar with you when I heard you on the Warp World podcast. And one of the things that stuck out right away was how good the podcast sounded, especially considering that they were all in different points of the, of North America, and just right away. And then I've been a gaming historian fan, it seems like forever now, and I could definitely tell your influence there as well. Just these things, they have a great sound. And I can almost, I don't want to guess, but I mean, there's this great mastering and things that you do on the audio side of things, and I'm really appreciative because when I'm listening to it in the car on my headphones, it always sounds great. So, and it always did sound great back then as well. So,
yeah, and doing the audio for the Warp World podcast was my entryway into that kind of speedrunning community, I guess you could say. And it was also my first dive back into audio as a professional after market crash of 2008, because I was doing that more professionally full-time beforehand. Things didn't go as well as I wanted when the market crashed. I had to stop doing that. And then I reached out to Jakku on 2017 saying, hey, can I work on your podcast? Because it's entertaining, but I can make it sound better, I think. and it's all history from there.
That's so awesome to hear. And it's so interesting the way that affected you. I just as a quick side note as well, before I went into full-time teaching, full-time content creator, not so much my own stuff, but working for other productions. I'm in Southern California. So there was always the next video gig right around the corner. But interestingly enough, COVID just put like a stop to like all of that. And so many of us were just sidelined. And as soon as people were able to see each other again and to get into production, now we've been very fortunate here in Southern California where it's just many of the gigs have piled up, it seems like, and everyone wants content right away. So yeah, it's been kind of interesting to deal with it. So
definitely.
Anyway, so let's first start off. I always like to start off with like kind of like your story with gaming. What got you into gaming? When did you become, if you will, a gamer, or at least what was some of your first experiences with video gaming that dropped you into the playing with and enjoying video games?
I was fortunate growing up. My parents weren't against video games. They were supportive. They didn't play games themselves. I have a whole story about my dad, and like the only game he ever played were fishing games. Actually, the fishing mini game in Zelda, Ocarina of Time. That's literally it.
Wow.
Long story, but I'm not going to get into that now. Okay. But basically, we were like, a well-off enough family. It's not like we were struggling for anything, but my parents didn't want to spend a lot of money on video games because they're expensive. So I only got maybe one on my birthday each year kind of thing. So it was very limited in what I could enjoy. And so I played those games a lot and over and over and over. And that's kind of also where I started casually enjoying speedrunning because, I only had Super Mario World for the better part of 2 years back in 91. So it was just like, all right, I beat this game. I got 96 star. What can I do now? And it's just, young person no strats or anything. It's just like hold Y and run as quick as you can across the screen, trying to avoid all the enemies.
Totally.
I never studied game development or programming code, anything like that professionally or formally, I guess is the right word. I always enjoyed it, and that led me to this kind of speedrunning community, watching GDQ as it grew, enjoying the content from Grand Pooh Bear and people within the Mario community, and that eventually got me a little bit of a way into the community as well too, as somebody, not a content creator myself. I don't stream, I don't make any videos or anything like that. I just like to be what I call the technical conduit. So if somebody has an idea, a vision, something they want to accomplish, but they don't know how to do it, I can help them get from A to B.
I was going to ask you too, because it's interesting that it's interesting how many times it's come up on this podcast, like people who were speedrunning, which basically, they were just they had to play the game differently, because that's, even back then, a game was $60. Like, the price hasn't changed, at least in the States here. Like, it hasn't changed for like 20 something years. So that's super expensive back then.
They were closer to $80 or $100 up here in Canada.
Oh, brutal. So, yeah. So I guess that, did you ever formalize? Have you ever recorded a quote unquote speedrun, or has it still just been kind of a casual, fun thing that you enjoy?
No, it was just for fun. Never tried to stake my claim in anything. Except maybe, I think it was Mitch Flowerpower did a speedrun contest that was supposed to be more casual with a ROM hack he made.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got 7 minutes or 9 minutes, and like the actual speed run was 3. So I think I died like 9 times in that, but I was like, you know what? Put in my effort, had fun, enjoyed.
And so it's really random. So I was working with Mitch at the time. I was editing his videos, and that was a really cool contest,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed it myself just because it wasn't too challenging, right? It was one of those things we could just kind of pick up and give it a try. And yes, there was a lot of death from a lot of folks.
I know that was, I think, my first like ROM hack attempt. I ended up like playing a little bit of Grand Pooh World 2, I think, or something like that afterwards, but I didn't even beat the first level.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a jump.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. Well, very cool. Okay, nice. So I'm guessing, how does that lead in, or have you always had an affinity for the Game Boy, or is that something that has come later on through life?
It's come later on. I never owned the original Game Boy. I got to play on one of my cousins. They had an original Game Boy, and I loved Kirby's Dream Land and DuckTales. I think it was DuckTales 2 I played a lot of on their system. And then in 98, when the Game Boy Color came out, that was actually the first game console that I purchased with my own money. And it was like a big deal. Like, this is mine. I made, this is the fruit of my labor. So I, again, didn't have a lot of games for it. Some of them were really bad too, games that I had, like Turok 2 is not a good platform game. It has some redeeming qualities, but it's not something you really enjoy playing. You just kind of get through it just to get through it. But I played that through and through and tried to figure out the best way to play it, and even just how to beat it at times. But there was something really sweet about the Game Boy's approach to things, because, we had Game Gear and Sega's entries and all these other portable gaming systems that try to push the envelope in terms of what a portable console can do, but they never did well with battery life, and the games themselves weren't that fun. But instead, arguably, some people might say otherwise, but with the Game Boy, it's like simple console, 4 colors, reflective screen. Even with the Game Boy Color, there was no backlit, and great library of games. And even with the Game Boy Color, it's like it played all the old games, so I could take some of those old games that I found at the flea market or something, pop it in, and enjoyed it. It was always there. And I remember like playing something like Mario Golf and just played it to death on the Game Boy Color, like leveled up all the way to 100, which you only need to be at like level 20 to beat the game. And I also listened to, I think around the same time it came out, Rage Against the Machine's Battle of Los Angeles. So now whenever I listen to that song, I think of Mario hitting the course with the club, or listen to that album. So it's interesting how you kind of, make those associations. But didn't really get enthusiastic about the Game Boy as a device and as a development tool until I started playing with GB Studio and trying to make my own game.
Super interesting. I've shared this story a few different times, but I had a realization pretty early on that what made Game Boy so great was its games. And I know that sounds silly, but like as you mentioned, what was the Genesis? The Game Gear was out at the time, and there were these other the TurboGrafx Express in the US was out, and these are fully colored and all that kind of stuff. Yet, if you had access to that, I still saw so many people grabbing the Game Boy instead with the battery life and everything like that. I knew the Game Boy was working when my parents, I have two other brothers, and they didn't buy us a lot of games like yourself, but they did get us all Game Boys. And I woke up in the middle of the night one time, and there both of my parents sipping a soda and playing Tetris until wee hours of night. And that's what I was like, if my parents are enjoying gaming, there was something special about this. I was a wee lad at the time. So it's just, I completely agree with you that it's really interesting with such limitations what developers have been able to do. And we'll get to it here in just a second, especially now with this next wave of everything that's happening with GB Studio. So pretty cool and pretty awesome, even back then, that we have all these great games and a great library of games, to say the least.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned it, and I'd like to go there now. So you're the developer of the Warp Coin Catastrophe. I guess if you don't mind, start us, like, where did just this idea come from? Like, what did you want to do, and what did you want to accomplish, and why was GB Studio kind of the best avenue for that?
Sure. So the actual concept or first spark of Warp Coin Catastrophe was a tweet from Author Blues. And he enjoys the Ace Attorney games and had been looking for some fan games or possibly making his own, who knows. But he just basically tweeted the source code of one of these Ace Attorney fan games. And it was either written in JavaScript or in Twine or some other visual language. But it was a mess. The code was just absolute, like a trash pile. And his comment was like, this is the reason why there are not more Ace Attorney fan games. And so I looked at that as like, oh, I love Ace Attorney games. Like, I've played through most of them, and I actually really enjoyed a take on Ace Attorney, or an Ace Attorney style game, which was Harvey Birdman on PS2. I think it came out on GameCube as well too. And so that was actually, I played that game first because I loved Harvey Birdman. I had no idea what Ace Attorney was before then. And then when I was reading the reviews, they're like, oh, this is just an Ace Attorney clone. I'm like, oh, I guess I got to play those games. So I was like thinking, oh, that'd be cool, some type of Ace Attorney style game. Maybe I could make something like that too. That's a nice little challenge point. And then I had always, this is 2019, so I'd been with Warp World now for a couple of years, or at least 18 months or something like that. And throughout their podcast, I'm listening and mixing the sound, so I've got a good handle on everything they're talking about. They made these like ideas of what would they be like if they were a game, and what would their powers be? Like Jakku would have hacking powers, and X-Water would spray water or something like that. Tidal wave come in. So I was like, oh, maybe I could make a game with the Warp crew, and I can give them these special powers. And I thought maybe I'll do a shoot 'em up, maybe I'll do a beat 'em up, something like that. And then it just dawned on me. It's like, these guys speak at each other all the time. They make quips and jokes. Like, it's got to be a dialogue heavy game if we're going to do it. And Ace Attorney is the perfect avenue for that. And we can also bring in some other concepts that would be kind of cross-promotion. So at the time, they were sponsored by a chocolate company, Marianne's Chocolate, who made these Warp coins. And so that became the premise of the game, is that these Warp coins had been consumed by one of the staff members. And it was then an impromptu trial to try and determine the innocence or guiltiness of the person in question. So that was the idea where it all stemmed from. I probably would not have gone as far as I did with the game had there not been a little bit of tragedy in my life. So it was my father-in-law. He was very, very close with me and my family, amazing individual, Dave. And he was diagnosed with cancer in May of 2019, right around the time that I was starting to get this idea and those tweets from Author Blues. And he degraded very, very quickly. Like, he was gone in a few months. So that was a real eye-turner or eye-opener for me in terms of, I'm not getting any younger. I'm still young, but we don't have this much time in this world. And if there's something you want to do, just go do it. Just get it done. And something that had always been a dream of mine is creating something on a Nintendo console that actually runs on hardware. So that's what led me to start looking at the Game Boy as a development tool. I didn't even I knew about the limitations in terms, I've been interested in what it would take to create a Nintendo game. The NES was kind of like, the gold standard of homebrew. I thought maybe I'll try and build for that. And then in my research, I was looking at it and it's like, oh no, actually the Game Boy is a much more developer-friendly device to code for. And then because I had been doing all this research into different game development tools, the GB Studio, one of the early hey, this is how you can use GB Studio to make a game really easily, was from a pixel artist named Mort. Came in my feed, and just in YouTube, the algorithm brought it to me, and it was just like, oh my God, yeah, this is it. I gotta use GB Studio to try and make my game, because I played with it for 10 minutes and I was sold. It was like, this is the best development tool for somebody who's not good at coding.
That's such an interesting point. And not to dwell on tragedy, but I have experienced similar things in my own life where it's something that kicks you in the butt to do something. And people on this channel will know I'm a big fan of raising money for any sort of cancer research and stuff like that. But it really does highlight, you never know how much time you're going to have on this planet. So, what a great way to, to take that and to actually be productive and constructive with it. And while I haven't used the tools to create something myself yet, it's one of the things that strikes me right away when you load up GB Studio is how so I teach game design on the day job, and when you boot up Unity, you've got different you've got a million different settings right in your face, and GB Studio just seems so much more approachable. And so, as somebody who hadn't done any sort of development, is that something that take me through that experience of using the tools for the first time and having to learn and use some of this stuff?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is in mind. The GB Studio itself. Let's maybe talk a little bit about game development, and then it can kind of understand where it comes from. So
Sure.
The Game Boy has a Z80 sorry, I'm using air quotations for people who can't hear those. So Z80 processor, which has its own instruction set. People who have been coding with it for a while can use it as well too, but there are some special instructions, and you normally use ASM or assembly language to write for Game Boy games. Assembly is not user-friendly. It's friendlier than machine code, but essentially that's what it is. It's an interpreter for machine code where you're literally on the bare metal using just numbers. And it's like every frame or every second that the screen of the Game Boy refreshes, you have to do all the calculations for all the player positions, all of the sprite positions, all of the background. You have to do that all manually, and you have to be loading and unloading the memory and the processor. I ended up looking more into that after some Game Boy development as well too. So it is not approachable at all for somebody who has no understanding of computer science or coding in general. From that bore GBDK, or the Game Boy Development Kit, which is written in C. And C is a lot more user-friendly. It's a lot more readable. And within, just a few minutes, you can code a very simple Game Boy platformer using C, if you're familiar with the C language and how to code with it. The GBDK original libraries, I think, came out around 2000, so right towards the end of the Game Boy's life. Still had limitations, especially in terms of performance. If you coded something in C, it was almost guaranteed to not perform as well as something in ASM. And then Chris Maltby, who was a developer and somebody who actually works a lot with JavaScript and coding websites, took it upon himself to make gbdk.js, or a JavaScript implementation of gbdk. And that was pretty cool for a while. And then it was, all of a sudden, there was a Game Boy Jam that was out. And I think this was 2018 now. And he decided to make a visual IDE, or an integrated development environment, for his gbdk.js tool, and make it as simple as possible so that somebody can make a really simple Game Boy game using that tool. And that's how GB Studio was born. So its whole MO, the whole reason why it exists, is to make as simple as an interface as possible for somebody to just start making the game. So you should read through the documentation. There are some things you need to know, like what colors to use. A sprite cannot have 4 colors. It can only have 3. And of those 4 in the GB Studio, or sorry, in the Game Boy that can be rendered, you have to know which one cannot, which one is substituted for transparency. And you have to know what tile is, an 8x8 grid, how many tiles you can have on screen, and you have to keep those in mind. But once you actually build those with any pixel editor you want, I ended up using a tool called Pixel Studio, which is free on the iPad. But you can use GIMP, you can use Photoshop if you got it. You can even use Paint.
Yeah, I was about to say, some people have actually used Paint.
Yeah, and it's a little bit more challenging, but it's doable. Mm-hmm. You create your art assets. You load them into a folder, which is within the GB Studio project. And then you create your scenes. The scenes could either be like a map that you're walking through, or in my case, they were like actual cut scenes that appear on screen. You can load your sprites, which could be playable characters, non-playable characters. They could be things that you interact with. And then GB Studio also has triggers. So when a character walks over a particular spot on screen, something happens. And then all the code is super, super friendly for language. So if statements are just like, if this is true, if this variable is true, what happens? And then you can have different actions on screen, like dialogue appear or show a menu, yes or no. The very first version of GB Studio was very, very, very bare bones. There weren't even variables in there. You couldn't even save a game. It was just supposed to be like an experience that the player walks through. But very quickly, work was done by Chris, and he made it open source, so people were able to contribute to it. And they started building in features like variables, like conditional statements, switches, even timers were eventually added to it, and it ended up becoming a more fleshed out tool. But for my game, when I ended up making the Warp Coin Catastrophe, there was no point and click mechanic. None of this was thought possible, although people were experimenting with what was possible with GB Studio. But what you're looking at is basically a really massaged facade of a Pokemon game that just is make it to look like an Ace Attorney style game.
Right. That's really cool. And I want to get into the mechanic in just a second. But I did load up and I played Untitled Game Boy game. Oh gosh, I'm totally wrong.
The very first one.
Untitled GB game. And so that was the first game that Chris did for the Game Jam. It took about a week. And first of all, I'm always blown away by what some developers can do in like this short amount of time. Kind of real, because it's very playable and it's super fun. But one of the things that strikes you right away is how the graphics, I was really brought into the experience right away. Admittedly, I'm playing it on a PC, I was playing it through the emulator, but nonetheless, like the graphics are just really kind of striking. And he made it sound as if it was, if you have some art ideas on what you want to do, or if you're working with an artist, it's pretty easy to get it up and going. And so when I loaded up GB Studio for myself, I was like, oh, he's not kidding. Like you can be up within hours of just, of creating your assets and everything. And I know with my students, we approach it from an art perspective. Hey, what are the things we are creating? Because as every generation of Unity gets more and more popular, the coding aspect is really left to the the programmers, the coding side of things. So there are all these different things that artists can do to get involved. And so that was one of the things that's probably why I reacted so strongly to it. I'm like, it's pretty darn easy to get up and going. And so with Warp Coin Catastrophe, is it something, did you write out the script first? Were you building the assets first? So what was the order of operations for your...
Yeah. Script came first.
Okay.
So I have a film and audio background. And so even with those motion picture, you always write the script first. And the reason why I do that is because it's much cheaper to change words on a page than it is to try and change images or recode something. So it was actually a pretty lengthy script. It was 30 or 40 pages. And there was some conditional behavior in the script. So I'd said, if the player presses 1, then go to this page kind of thing. So almost like a choose your own adventure in there. I couldn't do too much branching path because number one, it's an Ace Attorney game. So there is a linearity to it. And the second is that it was a bit too challenging for me to try and do for my first game. So there is 5 or 6 different endings, depending if you consider like a game over an ending. And so that was baked into it, that certain conditions, if they were met, would unlock different endings. But that was the first thing to do, was like get the script, nail it down. And then I hired Sinistrusel, and they had, first of all, done the art for the Warp Coin packaging, so it would be consistent, which was nice. And that was actually one of the first things that I did when I was thinking of this would work, is I tried converting the Warp Coin art into Game Boy palette and see if it would fit on screen with the tile count.
Yeah.
And it did. So I was like, hey, yeah, all right, I can totally hire them. And here we go. We got the art, and they were down for it. They worked, thankfully, along with everybody else who contributed to the game eventually on a profit share. So I didn't have to pay out of pocket for it, which was nice.
Hey.
And it ended up working for them in the end because the Kickstarter was fairly successful. I think we ended up raising a bit over 9,000 for it. But that was the idea. Was first I created the script, then I built all the scenes and did all the logic. And for a good part of like 3 or 4 months, the art in the game was literally just a circle with the person's name on it. So it was like the barest bones of placeholder there was. I then used that in conjunction with the script to create the asset list, because since everybody was working on a profit share and I didn't want to overload Sinri, they ended up still doing like 30 pieces of unique art for it. So it was a lot of work, but they did the art. I brought it into Pixel Studio to then convert so that it would work with GB Studio. Added a few little bit of my own flares as well too, for outlines and different things to make sure that it read well on a Game Boy. And then the final thing was the music, which I have a friendship with one of the members of Brave Shores, who is also one of the actors, Jay McCarroll, on Nirvana, the band, the show. And they are
so cool.
There's a whole it's Wednesdays, dude, and there's the whole song from the We Shop Wednesday. That's from Nirvana, the band, the show. Anyways, Jay gratefully allowed me to use Brave Shores music in the game. So when you fire up Warp Coin Catastrophe and it has that really wicked opening song, that's actually a song from Brave Shores. And I had another member of the GB Studio community named Emberlyn, and she ended up adapting or translating the music from just listening by ear into Game Boy format, because you still have to follow the music restrictions of the Game Boy, the 4-channel and the mod format, in order to actually compose it.
There's no extra mappers or anything. no,
there's
audio.
no. Once a month, somebody in the Discord's like, "Hey, is there a way I can just bring an MP3 into GB Studio?" It's like, no, you still have to manually trigger the notes.
If you're watching the video of this, I'll include a link in the show notes. The video you're watching of the Warp Coin Catastrophe, and it has all of its glorious audio as well. If you actually go see the video, is Indecision. It's on his YouTube channel, and I will link it so you can get a chance if you're not familiar with the game. Because first of all, the artwork is just stunning. It's like it's almost kind of unbelievable sometimes what you can actually pack on and what you can do on the Game Boy, considering all its limitations. But also the audio, the soundtrack is just jamming the whole time, so it's really great. Yeah. Okay, so that leads then to the mechanics, and we'll get to GB Studio Central here in just a second, but you did this great series on development workflow, and one of them was about mechanics and what you can, why that is important to the process of game development. So how did you end up settling on a mechanic, and then how did you end up doing it, as you mentioned, with some Pokemon magic to get it to work?
So the first thing I just want to clarify is that the game development series is written by Gumpy Function, who is an amazing contributor to the Game Boy and GB Studio community. That whole series, I think he's up to like 10 articles now. We've only released 6 of them.
Oh, nice.
And I'm telling him like we need to bundle this into a book and actually release it because
Absolutely.
it's great.
The information is invaluable in that stuff in the articles.
The mechanic was built like all I was trying to do was emulate Ace Attorney. So an Ace Attorney game, at its bare bones, first of all, you have to collect the evidence. And it's normally done like at a scene of a crime. Sometimes it's already given to you. It's like, this is the evidence that was found. And then a witness will have a testimony. It's normally like a 5-sentence, maybe 6-sentence kind of statement. This is what I saw. This is what happened. And then you as the examiner or the persecutor, whatever you want to say, the people in the attorney, the law, the courtroom will have the opportunity to take each statement, so each sentence is broken down, and either press the witness on, what more can you say about this? Can you please explain what you're saying? Or you could present something. So the idea is you are trying to present a piece of evidence that's going to contradict the witness's statement. So that's the whole thing. Pick out and break apart the holes in the witness's testimony. In order to do it from a mechanical standpoint, this is an interesting point in that my original way that I had implemented it in the game, I gave it to some playtesters, and they had no idea how it worked. They had not played an Ace Attorney game before, so that's an assumption as a game developer that I made a mistake. And in addition to that, the limitations of the Game Boy, I was trying to use the text mechanic to actually write out the sentences, but then the sentences would go away, and then they would have the 2 buttons appear on screen, whether they want to press or present, and like, well, what do I do with this? And then they didn't know that you can move back and forth between sentences. So it's like, all right, we have to rethink this. How can I use GB Studio? How can I use the actual limitations of the Game Boy? So instead of having the actual text dialogue tool generate the text on screen, it was baked into the background. So it was always there. And then you moved between scenes back and forth to actually change the sentence that you want. And those press and present buttons were on screen at all times. When you moved back and forth between the statements, it created a variable to say this is the statement. So statement 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if you went through the inventory of what the evidence is, it also had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if you pressed enter to say, do you want to present this? There was just a simple conditional statement. If the first variable is 2 and the second variable is 3, boom, you've done it right. And then the character, which was played by X-Butters, hold it, or whatever it was that he says, objection. And if you were wrong, then it brought you to one of the fail states where you would lose one of your coins, which is like your health meter. You lose 5 of those and the game's over. So it was just about trying to, again, use the tools available. And it's pretty simple at its core, but if you've never done any kind of development before, you might not have thought to do that. And that was actually the first thing that I did before I even started writing the script. It's like I wanted to make sure that mechanic could work first. So I prototyped using just the assets that were available with the sample game to make sure that present witness testimony and all that would work before I went any further, because no point in writing the script if you can't actually make the game mechanic work.
So true. And I think you highlighted such an important part of any sort of development process. And it's one of my favorite things to kind of observe when we don't do a whole lot of coding, but we will do interactive experiences in Scratch, which is a really great programming language for students. And also when they get to Unity, but when they first hand over whatever they've made to the person sitting next to them to try out, and you could just kind of see the light bulbs sometimes running like, why didn't you get that? Well, you didn't understand what I just did, that whole thing. And then you start to analyze, okay, if they're not getting it's something that I did, and to see that happening in real time, it's such an important part of the process when you're testing out a mechanic, to share it with somebody who has no idea what you're doing and see where they take it and what they do with it. So pretty smart. I'm glad you got a chance to do that early on in the process. So it helps you. I assume at that point you iterate and you try some different things to make that work, which was what we ended up getting in the final game. Pretty cool.
Yes. And there was an extensive playtest, at least for a game of its length. It was 4 weeks long. We had about 10 testers work on it. and they found a lot of spelling mistakes. They found some glitches here, and they made lots of suggestions. Like even in the beginning, there's a searching the scene of the crime, and I knew as a game developer, oh, the person has to find 8 items in order to proceed. But as the playtesters were playing, is like, I don't know what stuff I've found yet, and I don't need to. It's like, oh, you know what? I should probably put like. And somebody had asked, can we have like just a button that says case or something? I was like, yeah, perfect. Case button. We're going to put it in there.
There you go. I'm curious, while you're going through this process, I don't have a formal coding background, nor do I that's my least, that's what I have the least amount of experience in. Were there any bugs or things that came up while using Studio that you ended up like having to code or to recode or to change out some of the coding? And how did you go about learning that avenue, or at least experience with that, with that side of things?
Yes. And again, it's not so much, so like GB Studio, you don't have to do any like code in the traditional sense. You have to still, it's all visual. You're doing drop down, but how the actual game interacts and operates is important. So one thing that I had a big issue with was the lack of any triggers. So and the initial version of GB Studio had 9 triggers, I think, was the maximum they could have on screen. That's as much memory as they could handle. The current version has 30, and it's like beautiful for, especially for point and click. That's perfect. But for myself, I wanted to have 10 unique areas on screen that you can point and click, in addition to move to the next room left and right, in addition to the help menu, in addition to the exit menu, and in addition to the case menu. So I needed 15 things on screen, and I only had 9. So I developed or devised a very simple XY check. Player position here, store the position in variable X, for their X position, store in Y. And if it's in between this much, then we're on the TV. So make a little dialogue for the TV. That was great, except every time somebody was pressing A, it was going through the list of all the X and Y positions and slowing the hell out of the Game Boy, which was really noticeable with the music. So what I ended up doing was actually using the triggers, what they were not intended for, and created slices. So when you moved to a certain point in X, then you were in this X area of the game, and it only had 3 variables to check, and then you move over a little bit more, and then you're in slice 2, slice 3, slice 4. So those kind of optimizations I wouldn't have thought to have done, but in that early version of GB Studio with the limitations there, that's how I got around that. And it still slows down a little bit, especially if somebody's jamming the A button on an old DMG, original Game Boy. The Game Boy Color has twice the CPU speed, so it's able to manage it pretty well. But that was a nifty little workaround that I had to optimize. And the joke was later when the GB Studio 2, the beta that is now GB Studio 3 came out, they had incorporated these 30 triggers just for me.
Hey, nice. That's the proximity sound trigger.
There you go.
Perfect. Oh, that's so great. I mean, but we're going to get to this because that's one of the things that struck me right away about GB Studios, the community that is around it and supporting it, and how a lot of what we're seeing is this swelling of support from the community. And I want to get to it in a sec, but I want to wrap up things. You answered the question, I think, but I am curious, how much were you actually using on a Game Boy? Were you testing on the Game Boy itself, or were you just running it in the emulator? Like, as far as that process goes, how does that work?
I didn't have a Game Boy to test on at the time. My Game Boy Color was lost somewhere at my parents' place, and they still haven't found it. My original one. I know. It's there somewhere. My original Game Boy Color. I luckily have a replacement now after all these years, which was actually given to me by a member of the GB Studio community. I paid for the parts, but they did the labor to mod it and everything, and it's really nice of them to do that. Ooh. But what I was going to say is I have a game store nearby, a retro game store, Game Haven. I'm going to drop their name because they're so nice.
Absolutely.
And they let me come in once a week, just try on one of their old Game Boys that they hadn't sold, because I just wanted to make sure. I knew that theoretically it worked, But Jeremy there is just like, yeah, go ahead, play. And so I just popped in. I had a little flashable cart and I played it and I made, yeah, it's still working good. Awesome. And that's where I noticed some of those things, but I was really happy. It was funny. In the end that I gave him a copy of the game as a thank you. But the other game testers were a mix. So one person had a Super Game Boy and they were able to use a flashable cart to test on the Super Game Boy. Another person had I can't remember what it's called. It's almost like a RetroPie kind of portable, but RGB something. So they had like a little emulator device that could play actual carts. And so I had a myriad of other people tell me, yeah, it's working now. But now I actually am able to test on Game Boy on hardware. And there was something really nice too. My wife has a Game Boy Advance and she never lets me touch it. But for the one time that I was actually starting to get the game going, is like, can I please, like, I've got a flashable cart, can I try on it? And so she, yeah, you could try it now. And so then and the first time you load it up and it actually works is like one of those like breathtaking moments. Like it's just, you never forget that. It's like, such a big sigh of relief and a big breath. It feels so good to see something you've worked on work on actual Nintendo hardware.
That is so awesome. I can only imagine the feeling. Game Boy Advance is my go-to Game Boy experience as well. I have an old Game Boy, but I'd prefer playing it. I like the form factor. I have one that's modded with the backlight and everything, and that's the best way to go. So, how cool. That's so. I can only imagine what that feeling's like to actually see it working on a piece of hardware. Getting it out of the emulator. That brings up, the next question, and that is, you did a limited run of physical cartridges with this game. How does that even happen? What is the process about having a physical Game Boy cartridge produced in the 2000 teens at this point, or 2020?
I wouldn't have done the Kickstarter if the physical cart wasn't doable. So it's just at the time, so 3-4 years ago, the easiest way to source carts was through bootleggers.
Okay, well, there you
go. So, I was upfront with that with the Kickstarter. Like, these are reproduction carts. Reproduction carts are flashable, and there's also a problem with them is that in order to save on costs, they use a Game Boy Advance cart itself, actually. So it runs on 3 volts as opposed to 5 volts. And that actually drains the battery on the cart faster. So most of the carts, if you bought a Kickstarter version of the Warp Coin Catastrophe, it's right there in the manual. After a year, you're going to need to replace the battery. Luckily, these batteries are not soldered. So you could just take a screwdriver, open it up, pop a new coin battery in, and the battery is only there for the game save. So it's not that big, especially since the game could be completed in 20-30 minutes. But nowadays, there are multiple competing Game Boy cart developers. So we have a slew of people that have made it both proprietary and open source, PCB, layouts and plans on how to make these carts. My favorite that I work with closely is Inside Gadgets. Inside Gadgets also makes one of the most popular flashers. So the GBX cart is what I actually used for Warp Coin Catastrophe to flash all those. It's a $20 device. So as entry for a budgeting game developer, it's fairly affordable to try and jump into that. And that's what I ended up doing. It was harder back then to source everything. And I remember when I was looking at one of these reproduction cart sellers back in 2019, it's like, hi, I'd like to purchase 120 carts. He's just like, oh, is that a typo? You want 12, right? It's like, no, I want 120, please. I was like, okay, I guess. He's like, you're going to pay for those all up front? Like, yep, I got the money, the Kickstarter. Yeah. And I was like, oh, and I don't want any labels on them. I want them all blank. And it's like, why? It's like, what are you going to do with these? I thought you're going to resell. Yeah, I'm going to resell with my own label. So he was a little bit confused. And they were also coming from China. So there was all these challenges in terms
language
of shipping.
Barriers, I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and customs as well, too.
Oh, yeah. Trying to get into the country, of course.
Yeah. But it all worked out, thankfully. At the time, we were also just at the beginning of COVID, so that delayed shipping as well, too. But nowadays, it's so much easier. There's not only game cart developers that make the PCBs and the carts and all the bells and whistles, but there's also game publishers now. So Incubate 8, or is it Incubate Games. They have the number 8 in there.
Yeah,
so
the 8's in there. Yeah, they're on itch.io as well. I've seen that.
Yeah, Incubate. They are actually a subsidiary of Retro Modding. Retro Modding is very popular for their Game Boy modding and other device providers. They're a seller in Montreal. I have a relationship as well with them. Excellent, wonderful people. So they will buy, basically they're publishing Game Boy games in 2022. They've already published, I think, 5 or 6. Some of them are very successful in the releases. And they're people who were successful as independent developers before, like Spacebot and their Dragonborn, are now working with Incubate because it's a load off their back to take care of all the production. There's Bitmap Soft as well too. Bitmap Soft, who also has released games for Ronte carts. So all these like different developers and publishers are working together now, and it's because not only is there the games being made, but there's a market to sell these. Some of these, like we saw, Dedius has hit
The classic
30,000. Yeah, this is like one of the first again Game Boy GB Studio games that was
really
released,
fun.
and it's a horror game as well too, which was a genre that was lacking on the Game Boy. So it's nice to see something more mature adult. But they've hit 30,000 downloads, which again in 2022 you would. I mean, obviously they've 2 or 3 years of the game being out, but that's awesome. You know, that's a great place to start doing that. It's not going to be the same for everybody. Like Warp Coin Catastrophe has hit 10,000 downloads as well too, which is great. It's a free game though, so it's like, you know,
it has
it's
its
a
own
little
life
bit
now,
the incentives. Yeah, the incentives there. But the game itself in its small run did 120, which was successful in my mind. But you can't. I've also talked with larger developers, bigger names. I mean, Limited Rum Games publishes Game Boy games as well too, but there's a hesitancy to sink money into the development costs because the development costs are not necessarily going to be recouped.
Right.
So it's still largely a hobbyist side project for fun venture that hopefully then, you know, you can make a little bit of money off of it to offset some of the time and also just reward the people who have put time into it.
Yeah, and
be realistic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's super helpful to know if this is something you want to consider. Before we move on, one last little thing, because I've seen videos, but I've never tried it myself. But when you flash your chips and everything, that's something that it seems like it's a pretty straightforward process nowadays. That, you know, you get your chip, you pop it in the flashy device and a couple of things and you're off. Did you, so you're the person who actually ended up flashing all 120 of the carts?
Yeah, but again, the tools made by Inside Gadgets, they include the software. Yeah. There is some other third-party open source software that works really well now as well too. But you can flash a cart within a minute. And it's not a lot of data. It's only a meg anyways. Right. The carts are slow, but they still flash in relatively good time. I still remember though, because of not only did I have to flash all the carts, but I had to test all the carts. So I think it was like 4 days of me just flashing, testing, you know, so 120 cards takes a long time. With the tools that they have, like Inside Gadgets has this, how do I describe it? It's like an array. You can flash like 10 at a time.
Yeah, I've seen those. Awesome. Yeah, where you can do multiple at once.
Yeah. And then if I don't know other markets nowadays, if it's possible, but it is theoretically possible to also program ROMs. So read-only flash.
Yeah.
It's not flashable, but read-only memory that would have the actual ROM data hard-coded on it, and then that would be manufactured. But you have to hit a pretty big minimum in order to hit that.
Yeah, imagine that's a little bit bigger quantities. And the other thing I wanted to touch upon is that it seems like because of the community, we're getting better and better tools to save your save file. So if you do need to do a battery replacement, you can take your save file with you. There seems like there's better ways to do that. And I can't remember, I can't remember some of the devices where you can just pop your card in and...
Yep, GB Operator is one of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's the Joey, there's... also the Inside Gadgets GBX cart. There's lots of competitors now, which is great too.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's just great that you don't have to. If this is something that's important to you, which is kind of cool. It's kind of a great throwback. Some people have some of their saves, from when they were a kid and stuff, but it also works for the game too. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the community and the scene. And as I mentioned earlier, the thing that struck me right away, and so I listened to a podcast. It's called This Is Game Boy Podcast. It's hosted by Mula and E Bloody Candy. And that's when I first heard of Dedius. And I'm like, what is this Dedius? And I had heard a little bit about GB Studio. I have some developers in my channel. They're very they share some of this stuff, and it's super interesting to hear about. And then I tried Dedius after hearing them talk about it, and I was just like, wow, I can't believe this feels like a modern game, but it's on Game Boy, but it's like, it has the polish. Like there was just, it feels like, this sounds so dismissive, but it feels like a real game. And I don't mean that in the negative. I really don't. Cause it's just like, I wasn't expecting anything. And all of a sudden I got this great experience. And so I guess the community, they've really adopted this thing, and it sounds. I'm talking already so positive about it. Can you tell us a little bit about the community and how there's all this development going on even as we speak?
Yeah, the first thing is GB Studio being free, so there is a option to pay for it on itch. That helps out Chris Maltby, because there's site hosting costs and other things.
And he's still developing it. We're already on version 3.
Yeah. But if anybody wants to, they can download it. I downloaded it for free when I was first starting it. I ended up paying it for much more than it was worth when I ended up doing well on the Kickstarter, because I felt that was the right thing to do. But, having a free tool automatically breaks down barriers and automatically removes some of that kind of gatekeeping that happens in some other communities. The second is the ease of the tool's use. And again, I'm trying to be very sensitive in how I actually approach this, but after starting with GB Studio, I started wanting to learn more about other development tools, not just Game Boy development tools, but other ones. I tried doing some coding with, Discord bots and other stuff. And when you have higher level or more complicated tool sets, the people who are comfortable with those tool sets don't want to be answering the basics often. So you will just often, and I mean, again, I'm making a generalization here, so I'm just trying to be careful in how I phrase this, but the experience that I had was that I would ask a question and I would get the answer, read the docs.
Right.
And it's like, well, I did read the docs. I didn't understand it. Can somebody please point this out? And, sometimes I would point out my code and I was like, this is what I wrote. And somebody would actually insult it. It's like, are you an idiot? I'm like, this is not helpful at all.
I would also say you're in education, so you know that we don't all learn by just reading something. Some of us need something a little bit more tangible. We all learn in different ways. That's what I guess I'm getting at.
Yeah. So, but it's a breath of fresh air working with the GB Studio community, and it feels like the actual community itself has been built up from this fostering of invitation. So anybody's welcome to join, anybody's welcome to learn. We all start somewhere as well too. So, GB Studio is a user-friendly, like an inviting tool to use. So we expect these easy questions to be asked a lot. And that was also another reason why GB Studio Central kind of became a thing, because we wanted somewhere where we could point people to resources. Okay, here's a tutorial on how to actually do that, because this is everybody's asked at some point. But not be dismissive, but like,
no.
here's the actual answer.
I will help you get there. So so you can take that with you. Absolutely.
Exactly. So yeah, it's been really welcoming, and the fact that it's also open source, so people who are more knowledgeable in the actual coding of the tool, in any kind of coding tool set, are able to contribute and to make it better. And so it's got that kind of that very unique cross section of all those things that come together and make it a very inviting place to be, and very welcoming. The GB Studio Discord's been great. I've made lots of good friends on there and collaborators who I've worked with in different capacities. And the Reddit is also a very good place as well too. People are very welcoming there and helpful. It's a little bit harder because the time makes it like it's not always immediate, the answer, but then also Discord could be problematic with that too, because sometimes you want things archived and be able to reference later, but it's spoke about 3 months ago.
It is one of the big drawbacks of Discord. I love Discord, but that's sort of the drawbacks is sometimes trying to archive some of this information because it's important stuff. We're running up against that in speedrunning, interestingly enough, where it's like there's all this great archival stuff, but to query it or to search it can be quite a challenge sometimes. And
Absolutely.
some communities are actually starting a process of formalizing how do we archive, how do we get some of this stuff. And I think that what you're describing too kind of reminds me or sounds like a lot of things that happen in different speedrunning communities as well, because most of us who speedrun games, we're pretty passionate about the game that we're speedrunning. And so we love answering questions. Yeah, please come in here. You know, we want the more people, the merrier that are interested in our games. And it sounds like there's that aspect. Like, I mean, there's the Game Boy community, if there's one thing I've noticed, seems to be passionate about the Game Boy, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the same thing too. When there was a moment in time where I thought I could try to speedrun Star Tropics.
Oh, okay, just that game.
Yeah, I love the game, and I was like, oh, this is fun. And the community in speedrunning in general is not only welcoming, but also very happy to share information.
Yeah.
Because, again, it's not a profit generator. It's not a closed source thing. Anybody who tries to be closed source in speedrunning is kind of taken for a fake.
Yeah.
You know, you don't really actually know what you're talking about there, but it's like we're all in this together. We all benefit. If you're, you know, coming in and learning a new strat, you're actually helping everybody. So
Right.
it's nice. So we get that same kind of vibe. Yeah, definitely with the GB Studio community where everybody's, oh, check out this, how I got this done. It's like I am porting Netscape, which is a popular NES homebrew, and I show off the mechanics that I've come up with. People love it and they want to learn how to do it themselves. I'm not going to be like holding that to my chest. It's like, here you go. This is how you do it.
I think one of the things too, there's so many things that reduce the barrier to get into this. But one of the things for me is that the ease of use and the ease of play. So if you go to itch and you look up, you know, the games that have been produced by Game Boy Studio, a lot of them you can play in the browser, like right away. You know, we have tools where we can emulate a Game Boy with pretty good accuracy at this point right there in the browser. So it just removes some of those barriers of even just wanting to play the games.
The fact that the browser-based emulator works really well on mobile is a super win too, because it feels almost like a Game Boy. I know there's not the tactileness to it, but the form factor is like, oh yeah, I'm playing a Game Boy game.
Totally works perfectly. It's so cool. That actually brings, I think, to the next thing I want to cover, and that's the Game Boy GB Studio Central. And how did this come about? And tell us a little bit of a story about this, because what a great resource. And I got to tell you, when I first discovered this, is what made me ask you to be on the podcast. I was like, there is so much good information here. So how did this whole thing start, and what exactly is it? We'll start with that too.
Sure. So GB Studio Central, you know what, it is actually easy to tell the story of it and then what it is. I don't have to say what it is first, but
perfect.
The joke was, or how it actually started was Ember, the same person who composed the music for Warp Coin Catastrophe. She's also a mod on the GB Studio Discord. Somebody was stuck on Dragonborn, the one of GB Studio's most popular entries of big RPG. It's like one of the biggest ones still out there. Pardon me. And someone's like, is there like a player's guide for Dragonborn? And everyone was like, that's an interesting concept because, you know, homebrews really don't get player's guides. I still haven't found. I found a couple of like guides for different things, but not for like Warp Coin or anything like that, because they're mostly small games.
There's no official Nintendo player's guide.
Yeah, exactly. And so Ember was like, "Oh, you know what we should do?" As a joke, she's like, "We should make a Nintendo Power for GB Studio. It'd be so awesome." Because you know, Nintendo Power had the player's corner and stuff, and they like had the walkthroughs and stuff. And then that just got a bunch of gears turning in my head. I'm like, wait a minute. You know, we do want a central repository of information, a way to better expand the community and also document some of these things and highlight and showcase some of the things that are made with GB Studio. So I approached her and I said, hey, do you think you'd actually want to be part of this if I actually do some type of blog? And she initially thought it should be more of a physical version, like an actual publication. She has graphic design background, so she could have actually done some of the layouts and things like that.
She also sounds like she knows the retro community. We are big fans of physical things like that, so totally understand that aspect.
But you know, doing a physical publication has its challenges, and not something that I was prepared to lead, so to speak, at that point. I don't think I needed to be the leader, but in anytime something happens, there has to be somebody who does take the lead. And in this case, I had the resources to get this going in terms of web hosting and server space, because I had my own stuff going with my own personal projects. In terms of the know-how, because my day job, part of it is actually running a WordPress server for
That's
students
helpful.
to learn on. So I was like, okay, I know I can get this going. So I reached out to Chris Maltby first and foremost, presented the ideas. Hey, we want to make the Nintendo Power for GB Studio. Would you be cool with that? And he just loved it. It's like, absolutely, do it. And he gave us all the SVGs of all the GB Studio logos and everything.
Wow.
It's like have
Super
everything.
supportive. How cool is that?
Yeah. And I was like, I even offered, I was like, hey, we'll give you a percentage of the profits. Like, no. Like I'm being really nice to Chris. He actually declined one of the payments at one point because he's like seeing GB Studio Central also as a marketing tool for GB Studio. It brings people into GB Studio.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Yeah. So I was happy about that. But I ended up reaching out to some of the mods of GB Studio Discord, because they already have, a good handle on the software, and some other people who were very communicative, like the people who were the ones who were answering the questions the most. It's like, okay, you seem knowledgeable about this. Would you actually be up for writing an article? Now, so that's what it ended up. That was the first basically iteration, was just a group. It was about 5-6 people. We would take like one article a month kind of idea. You can contribute more if you want, you can contribute less. And that's where it continued to be. It was like, this is supposed to be community driven. So there is payment involved. We do have advertising coming in through Google Ads, and we have a Patreon on the way that's going to have some benefits as well too. But the idea was to not have anything that would stress people out. So it's like you have an opportunity to contribute an article, and some people have only done one article and haven't contributed again. Like they said their piece and they were happy, and that's totally fine. People that like to contribute a lot or are motivated to, Gumby Function, again, is like one of our main contributors right now with the development workflow and its GB Classic series. I've written a number of articles myself, but the idea is we do tips and guides. So this is how you make a menu in GB Studio. This is how you use the sprite editor. This is how you worry about backgrounds. This is how you use translation tools. So things that, again, as people ask these questions in the Discord, or if they're just trying to figure this out and they do a Google search, oh, there's the answer. Here's a nice little well-written step-by-step understanding of how GB Studio works and how to do this particular thing. Because it's still, the documentation is great for GB Studio, but it still gives you just the bare, like, this is the tool, this is what the tool does, but not necessarily how to use it. So we wanted to fill that gap. How do you actually use it? We do interviews with developers and other people that were of interest. We got to speak with Modern Vintage Gamer and people at Limited Run Games and Way Forward when they released Shantae on the re-release cart, because that was a big deal because they got a Game Boy emulator on the Switch. So we wanted to hear all about that experience. We do news. So when things happen, like when GB Studio 3 came out, or when there was the GB Jam that was happening, or in 21. And we also do spotlights. So we showcase GB Studio games and show them like what's unique about this, what's cool about this, and why you should be interested in go play this game kind of thing. We don't do reviews. Like we don't make any type of evaluation. Like this is a 7 out of 10. No, the idea is like, here's something cool. Somebody made it. Somebody put a lot of hard work into it. You should check it out. And this is why. And this is why it's unique and why it's beneficial to the community as well, too. And we've got a lot of great traction. Like the Twitter is up at 3,000 followers, which I know is peanuts for some people, but for, again, a 30-year-old console and a game development tool for it, like we're really happy with. And we see these people like very active, always retweeting and liking our stuff and communicating with us. And we get lots of ideas from people. They have lots of suggestions for articles. We love it all. It's really nice to see that kind of engagement.
There are a couple of things that struck me right away when I visited the site. And one of them was selfishly, I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to do this for like every single speedrunning game and all that. No, but I did, but it's because one of the things we talked about earlier where like a lot of things are happening in Discord right now, but the other place that we kind of like use as repositories for ourselves is speedrunner.com right now. And for certain things, it's not necessarily set up, to be something like what we've got here, where it's easily searchable. Like just being able to query something makes it hugely a lot more user friendly. But then also the different kind of spotlights that you can do. I love that most of my time on the site has been about seeing these showcases of things. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy editorial content as well, but the showcase really is the kind of, hey, here's some things if you're interested in, and then you can, it's really almost like, the kid in the candy store. I could pick a little bit of this, I could check out this, and I don't have to rush through it. I can take my time with it. And when you're going through content like this, that's something I really appreciate, because the part, even though I haven't developed a game myself, part of me, is like, oh man, okay, so if I want to try out some of these tools, let's see what this can do, and I can have this up, I can see what this experience was, and it's really just a great location for everything. It's why I mentioned, like, man, I wish this is the kind of thing I'd like to see. I'd love to see for the games I speedrun and stuff, and I think you're showing that it's possible, right? That this, as much as maybe blogs aren't as possible as popular as maybe they used to be. I think this is really important work to keep this information around, and to hopefully have access to it in the future to come, because a lot of people have been out there doing a lot of different things that maybe the next generation might want to try out.
I would love, there's definitely some shortcomings in the way that the GB Studio Central is operated, particularly when it comes to the obligation. If nobody's obligated to make material for it, then we could end up having a shortfall, which, you don't really want. You still want the site traffic to be up there to support itself and all that. And you don't want people to be going, weeks without content as well, too. You still want to have that kind of drip to keep people engaged and interested. But there have been little off communications, nothing official, but I would love to have Central be like a framework. Like, this is actually how a site can operate. Here are the way things are set up, and here's what it needs to be successful, so people can learn from that. And that would be something else I'd have to document and put up for people to learn from. Yeah.
And I think that's important, because so we've seen, like the Mega Man community has their own leaderboards. Like there are communities who are willing to, keep something that is owned, and run by the community. And this is nothing negative to say about SRC or anything like that. It's more so like that, there you can design something, as we're seeing here, that is like a great way to showcase or to bring this information together. And I think that's really what I think you've shown and displayed here. And I basically at this point, it just takes somebody, who wants to do this for their own game or for their own community to do so. Like, this is a great template you've established. What do you think? I mean, I guess as we're moving forward in the future, do you think what kind of things is the community asking for? What does the community want to see, perhaps in future versions of GB Studio and maybe from GB Studio Central? Like, what does the future look like for Game Boy development, if you will?
I think the biggest hurdle right now is collaboration. So GB Studio is still built on a mostly single developer centric system. So we've attempted in different methods, I'm talking Wii's, the global Wii, right, to, try and use version control tools, but because of the way that UUIDs with GB Studio work, unique identifiers per system, it causes conflicts. So if I start building some code into a game and then somebody tries to add it, they don't work, and then it kind of breaks. So we are constantly working with this kind of checkout, check-in system, which is not really conducive for multiple collaboration. There have been some great collaborations, and I'm still collaborating, but that's a big thing that would be nice if it can be. I don't even know how they would solve that. That's a big ask. Music implementation is still a big hurdle for people to try and overcome. Now, there's been some really wicked stuff, like Potamus is one of the main devs, and he's made a piano roll, which is how most modern musicians think of music in terms of an actual left to right and up and down increases or decreases your pitch. But it's still limited, so that needs some development time to work onto it. And there's a few other, like, just nitpicky things. The underlying core of GB Studio is now something called Gbvm, or the Game Boy Virtual Machine. And there is a pseudo assembly language associated with it as well too, which is so powerful. So I'm almost coding now exclusively in it, with a lot of the work that I'm doing with background tile swapping and advanced user interfaces, things that were not possible in the first iteration, and even I'd argue to say would be very difficult to even do in GBDK. So that's really exciting. It's just back in that dangerous zone of too advanced
Right.
to explain. So it's not welcoming. And I want to see the tool expand or become easier to use. It's a hard trade-off though, because when you get things that are really easy, then they're also really limited.
Right.
So what's the balance between them? And I think just documenting exactly how GBVM works, what each position and all these arguments mean, and so that it's as clearly understood as a first challenge. And then the second is creating tutorials and stuff for that. So it may not necessarily be something that comes from the actual GB Studio tool. It might be something that GB Studio Central fills that void of, here's how you actually use GBVM in an actual use case to manipulate UI, and how you can actually create an actual window at the bottom of the screen with your health status kind of stuff. Because people are doing it, they're getting it done. It's just very hacky at this point, or very it's hard for one person to describe all the tools to be done. Everything else in terms of like the graphics editor is amazing. The sprite editor now, like I've actually will be releasing on social media soon, but somebody made a GB style game in Unity. So it kind of adhered to Game Boy limitations. And I asked them, hey, can you give me the sprite sheet for one of these characters?
Yeah.
I'm like, absolutely. And so I'm happy they were able to help me, but I was able to port it in. I was actually able to make it in GB Studio. I was actually able to take their sprite sheet and load it into GB Studio and have this really wicked, like 24 frame animation for an attack. And it worked. It was like 112 tiles, but it worked.
Wow.
You get 256, by the way. 256 tiles is the max that you can do. So out of 110 for just one character's overkill. But it was just really sweet to see that happen. So it's just like it's already super powerful. It's already super well implemented for the most part. It's just right now we just got to get the user understanding back up to where it was when it was in the first or second iteration.
That's something I think is important to note. And as somebody who's helped out with create some content for tutorial type stuff, the development, the tools, all that kind of stuff, super important, but almost as important is the documentation and the perhaps tutorial videos, whatever medium you're going to use. And that's almost sometimes a different skill set. In fact, we're working with many different engineers. Sometimes they don't communicate that might be in a way that might be understandable for somebody who has no clue about what they're doing. And sometimes they do actually do a great job of that. But being able to create those things is just as an important skill. And it sounds like that's something where perhaps we can spend some more time with, because that's although personally I found it like pretty, but then again, I guess I teach game design, so maybe I already have a little more experience than I even realized. So, but because I thought it was easy to jump in, but maybe that always is stuff that could be improved, right?
No, I think the GB Studio itself, even in GB Studio 3, is pretty easy to jump in. Even the sprite editor, like everything that is supposed to be advanced is easy. It's the underlying code. You can actually call an event called GBVM script right now. And you can also export your game as GBVM that can then be compiled later. But those are like the secret sauce. So if you were ever you're playing Zelda, Link's Awakening, and it's like something you do some type of mechanic. It's like something happens. Like, oh, I wonder how I could do that in GB Studio. You could probably do it with GBVM. It's just that's the next
powerful
level. It's like,
wow. I'm just realizing what you could do with that.
Yeah. It's hard to put it in words, but like, again, I'll give a very specific example. The port of Netscape that I'm doing, it's a point and click escape room. And right off the bat, at the beginning of the first screen that you see, there's a hair dryer and a flashlight on screen. Okay, so I can click on that and I can click on that and it will pick it up. And then I need to find a way to make it usable. So if I were using GB Studio in the traditional sense, I would have done it like I did in Warp Coin Catastrophe, where you press start button and here's your inventory. And maybe my inventories, I would have used sprites, which have their own limitations. You can only have 5 sprites across the screen at a time. So that's already a problem because each one of these sprites for the original Netscape were 5 wide. So I can only have 2 of those on screen at a time. That's a problem. So instead with Gbvm, I can actually use a command called Gbvm Set Overlay, which then brings up the window overlay. And the window overlay is, again, what you see in like something like Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, that you see the little item slots and the hearts at the bottom.
Oh, so
So
cool.
now I can use the Gbvm code to take a tile map of the flashlight and the hairdryer from another scene, which again, you need to know the actual index of where that is in the tile map, and then load that into the overlay so that it seems there. So it looks seamless to the player when they see it, but to actually know what code to write to do that is not user-friendly or beginner friendly at all.
Right. But I can see the potential there. You're adding functionality without having to create something brand new, right? Like the goal is for the tools to take care of all that. So basically the developer can just create whatever the hell they want to create. Like it's just wherever your mind goes. That's awesome. Yeah. That is so cool. Okay. I could definitely okay. So to comment on that for just 1 second, I think that when we're creating tools that add sophistication to the game, I think there is a certain level of it's okay that because there are now people who have developed many games on the platform, so it's okay at first obviously to give them a try at it because they already know how to use GB Studio. But I love the idea of trying to roll that down and bring it into the new users right away too. That is lofty, and I love that kind of potential and optimism to give it to them. That's so cool. This is the thing that blows me away about GB Studio and everything that I've learned about it, is that it seems like there's really no end to the potential currently as it sits. Yes, you're still limited by the sprite limits and the memory limits and all those kind of things, but the more the more powerful these tools get, it's really up to what the developer wants to imagine in their head. And this is like, I'm not going to go there, but I've thought about introducing this with students because I think it's such a great platform to start your first games. And this is one of the reasons I want to talk. Like, just hearing your experience, if somebody had no experience with this whatsoever, you were able to jump in and create a game that 120 full length cartridges, thousands of downloads. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing that something like that is possible.
Yeah. I do know of a couple of other educators that use GB Studio as a jump in, again, because you can compare it to Scratch,
right,
or even Bitsy or other things that are more drag and drop. Yeah,
drag and drop and easy, free and available on multiple platforms too, which is something I appreciate as well. A lot of our students nowadays, Chromebooks, that's all they have access to is a Chromebook, or something simple. If they have their phone, the lighter weight development tools. Big fan.
Yeah.
So is there anything we're missing? I feel like there's only the sky's the limit. So here's where we're at. If the whole point of this kind of thing too is if anybody was interested in using this or getting started in this, where's a great place to start, or where should we go to kind of check out how some of this works?
In terms of GB Studio, I do recommend checking out GB Studio Central. So it's just gbstudiocentral.com. You could see lots of tutorials there. There's if you search for basics, there's a whole series of basics articles to get your feet wet. But even before that, even before you start going into GB Studio Central, like if you want to see what some games can be made, go to itch.io and look up GB Studio in there. You'll see a bunch of games that were made of GB Studio because there are limitations. And I will say that, people who code to the metal, like using ASM, are able to come up with more flashy and more responsive games because that's just the nature of it. If you're going to be coding everything by yourself, then you're going to get a better experience out of it. So knowing what the limitations are helpful. And then download GB Studio, gbstudio.dev, or just it's actually on itch is where you find the download for it. It's $15 if you wish to pay for it, but please feel free to download it for free to start it out. It comes with a sample game. And rather, when you start up GB Studio for the first time, you have to create a new project, and the project can either be empty, absolutely nothing in there and you put all the assets in, or it can have the sample game. And the sample game is a great way to learn how GB Studio functions, because you will see all the scenes with the game world, like a little map of all the areas. You will see all the sprites, all the code that's in there in terms of functioning. Like, how do you actually get a start button to bring up a start menu? Oh, you attach the start button to a script, and the script is moved to the start menu. So something like that. It's like, oh, okay, there, it's all visual there. How do you do dialogue? How do you do variables? And you can actually play that game too. You can actually play through it and explore and see what's possible there and how the interface works. So that's my recommendation. Try that out, play other games, and see the documentation and see how that works.
This is kind of wild. When you boot up itch.io and you look for just the top Game Boy Studio games or GB Studio games, 420 results. Like, that shows you this community is alive and well and getting larger every day. It's just kind of wild.
The funny thing as well too is there's a number of Game Boy games on itch that aren't tagged with GB Studio.
Oh, interesting.
So I did after my game was released, I did a talk. It was a black box studio talk where I did a little, my whole story, this kind of thing. And for that, I did some data. And so officially licensed Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, there's 1,020 or 1,011, something like that. Wow. So just over 1,000 games were officially made for the Game Boy.
Yeah.
And the Game Boy Color. That's massive. I mean, most libraries are under that. But again, you're considering that the Game Boy started in 1989 and went all the way to 2001. That's a long time to be developing for. So the number of games on itch.io that are tagged Game Boy, so not necessarily GB Studio, could just also be Game Boy or just even Game Boy inspired, as of 2020 when I did that talk, was over 1,300. Oh, so it's like the actual homebrew scene has now outgrown the original Game Boy library, and that's 2 years ago. So since then there has been, especially with GB Studio 3, a blow up or explosion of all these like new games. And it was funny that when GB Studio Central first launched, and I was like, I can manage this. I was like telling everybody, it's like, every game that you tag GB Studio, I'm seeing it. Like I'm interacting with it. I know all this. It's like, I cannot keep up now. Like I need my team to help me keep me adept of all the stuff that's going on, because there is just so much amazing stuff coming out of the community, and people that are not even necessarily involved in the community. They're just using the tool on their own and getting by without the assistance. They're releasing stuff and I'm just learning about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, when did this come out? This is amazing. And I love playing these games too. There's just so much enjoyment and learning what people want to experience or want to give you as an experience.
It's really, as you mentioned, a lot of the games are made by one or small teams of people, and you can really feel the love for all of the, almost with every game that I've played through. And or at very least, you understand, hey, this person's trying to figure this out. It's so cool that they were able to. I'm actually able to play there. I was just playing around with the Doom port before. This creator had created Doom, and it's a very simple. It's not first person or anything, but I could just tell, okay, this person's trying to figure it out, and I appreciated that so much that they're trying, to give you that experience. The other one, I was go on. I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
So cool. If people, you mentioned it, you can't get a physical copy anymore, but if you wanted to play the Warp Coin Catastrophe, where might one find a link for that? And I'll include all this in the show notes and everything.
Luckily, Jacku made a really nice URL for that. It's game.warp.world. And it just directs to my itch page. So game.warp.world brings you to the itch page. The game is available to play in browser. It's a free download if you want to play the Game Boy, the actual GB ROM, or load it onto a flash cart and play it on hardware. It does work better on Game Boy Color or higher, so Game Boy Advance or any other device that is able to take advantage of extra speed. It is not a Game Boy Color game. It is for color, but the Game Boy Color has a better processor, so it doesn't slow down as much. The music sounds better on the Game Boy Color is what I'm trying to say, or higher.
And I would also say, if you have a Mister, I know that's quite a popular console right now, and some of the filters and color palettes that are being developed for the Mister, you can get a really great experience on Mister if that's your thing as well.
Absolutely.
So. Proximity Sound, thank you so much for spending some time and sharing your kind of journey through all this stuff. It's endlessly fascinating, and I'm so glad to see this community is thriving and also that you've had this great experience. Thanks so much for sharing it and taking us through it. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Just a quick shout out. If anybody, wanted to follow you on Twitter, you share stuff all the time on your Twitter, and I found so much useful information as far as audio stuff goes, but also Game Boy stuff. Where can people find you on Twitter if they need to?
At Proximity Sound. Thankfully, is all no underscores, anything like that. I got that a while back, but at Proximity Sound.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks everyone for listening, watching, viewing, liking, subscribing, and sharing. All of that stuff goes a long way to helping out the podcast. If you'd like any additional info, you can go to sequencebreakpodcast.com. All of our past episodes, everything's on there. You'll find everything there. If you'd like to watch live, follow the Sequence Break Twitter. That is Sequence Break PC, and you can join in, ask some questions, watch the whole thing live. It does happen. It's not really a set time, but I do post when I go live. Everything else, if you have any questions or anything like that, podcast at sequencebreakpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.